Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Outsourcing with Bill. Today I'm going to talk about a DFM webinar that I saw. We'll talk a little bit about DFM, then we'll get into some of the basics of the webinar. They took about 45 minutes to do it. I'm going to compress that into 5 minutes, just give kind of an overview and some of my thoughts on it. So the webinar was put on by PTC, HCL, and Alcon Labs, again talking about design for manufacturing or design for manufacturability. PTC, for those of you that don't know, is the creator of CREO, which is a CAD platform, used to be ProE. HCL is an IT and digital transformation company with about $10 billion in revenue. Alcon Labs is a company that deals in eye surgery equipment. That was pretty interesting. So at any rate, they put on a webinar talking about DFM and tools available with PTC and a plugin from HCL called DFMPro. They spent a significant amount of time talking about the challenges that the industry is facing, traditional DFM, and how DFMPro is helping Alcon Labs kind of accelerate their time to market and address some of these challenges. So for starters, the challenges, right? The biggest challenges that companies are facing and have been facing for forever, really, is time to market is a big one, right? And the cost of a DFM miss. The later in the cycle, the product development cycle, that you catch an issue related to manufacturing, the more costly it becomes. If you fix it in a CAD environment or a computer environment, it's not that bad. It costs you a little bit of time, but it's not too bad. But if it pops up in the prototype phase, it costs more money. And God help you if it pops up in the field. That's a big problem as you go into production. The other challenge that they articulated on the call was the skills gap in manufacturing, pointing out that yes, there's more people getting engineering degrees, but they're not necessarily being entirely focused on manufacturing. There's a lot of old knowledge out there about all these processes, and there's a risk that that gap is continuing to widen in terms of manufacturing knowledge. There's also a need for productivity improvements due to product complexity increasing. They had mentioned on the call that the part complexity has gone up by about 30% in the last 10 to 15 years, but the productivity has only gone up by 2%. They didn't get into the numbers. I don't know exactly where those come from. Kind of an interesting data point. But they did point out that as you look at organizations moving towards more digital, IoT connected assets, the mechanical complexities are increasing, which makes sense. And I talked about digital transformation in another one of my episodes. But when you talk about mechanical components and things that you have to manufacture, you're looking at something that now has to house some kind of ECU. There needs to be airflow, and you start looking at ribs and all these other things that might have to be put into that mechanical design that wasn't there, even 10 years ago. So those are the challenges that they articulated. I think they missed one. I personally think sustainability is another big one that could have been added to that pile as that becomes a much higher need, with the new technologies of additive manufacturing and some of these other things. DFM is going to continue to be important, and it could be a significant driver for sustainability. Again, doing that all in the CAD environment before you waste any material in the real world. So again, they talked about traditional DFM, kind of being driven by checklists, guidelines, expert reviews, Excel spreadsheets, and I know a handful of my clients are, Fortune 50 companies are still using spreadsheets. There's nothing wrong with that. It just takes a little bit more time to get that done. There's periodic training potentially of the design teams, but there's a lot of manual review. It's not scalable, it's not holistic. Typically someone who's going to be an expert in forgings is not also an expert in additive manufacturing. And so this old traditional approach is full of risks and bottlenecks that really, again, kind of accentuate some of those challenges we talked about earlier. So when they looked at DFMPro, the guy from Alcon Labs was talking about how this helps them. And he mentioned specifically, speed is a big one. He said that it was 100% faster, which I don't know exactly what that means, but it's clear that it's faster. Everything's kind of built into that system. It's all readily available. And it also addresses the skills gap. You've got all that information in a nice little package that's continuously updated. There's a support, through HCL if you've got questions on software or whatnot. But another thing that was really interesting was the DFMPro in particular has the ability to tie together industry standards as well as company-specific manufacturing guidelines. And Alcon Labs walked through an example where they selected one of their own standards internally that rules were developed around in order to say, hey, these are the things you need to look at outside of industry norms like hole tolerances and stuff like that, which I thought was pretty unique. The other thing is that he had mentioned the integrated documentation for the reports, which aided in traceability. There's the ability to put comments on them. In addition to being much, much faster, he had indicated that there's better documentation and that because it's a holistic approach, that consistently found issues much faster and issues that they would not have recognized on the first pass, using their older traditional methods. He had mentioned from Alcon Labs, had mentioned that the reason they started looking into DFM software was because he was charged with building kind of a DFM, I guess, center of excellence. So he brought together all of the experts in those areas, and they got to talking about all this stuff, and they came across DFMPro. And there's nothing wrong with doing what you're doing today, but with the speed at which business is moving, maybe looking at some software to augment your team and allow some of your experts to focus on other issues maybe makes a lot of sense. So if you've got any questions about DFMPro, feel free to reach out to me. If you found this helpful, give me a thumbs up. I appreciate it. I'm happy to connect. Again, if you've got any questions, I do work for HCL Technologies, so if you have a question on DFMPro, you can go to the website, dfmpro.com, or you can reach out directly to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Bill Gombert, and we can go from there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Outsourcing with Bill. Accelerate your success.